Do a brief talk about raw food diets today. Now, this is not a criticism, but an observation I've had in the clinic over the last 36 years that some of us can go real extreme, okay, in diet, thinking that we have to have a pure, clean diet, which I agree with. But I've seen some serious mistakes here, and I just want to clear a few things up with whoever would be listening, and if you can pass this on to your friends, because I know many people are going on this extreme diet, extreme fads thing, and it's really not doing them good long term. So what I'm going to do is this is for believers and people who don't say they believe. I'm going to use the scripture and Ellen White. I'm not going to read anything. I'm just going to quote a few things that they say, and then I'm going to go into the science, just touch on it. So this is a very brief video. I'm not going to go into detail, but I think a lot of you will understand what I'm trying to say. Now, first of all, a lot of people say, well, this is God's diet, okay? This is God's diet, and we should be having all raw, or 80% raw, or 100% raw. Well, let's have a look. What does the scripture say? First of all, in the Garden of Eden, when everyone was perfect, whether they had raw food diets or not, I don't know. And really, it's irrelevant, because Eden was perfect, and then sin came in, and then other things were added to the diet, like vegetables and herbs and stuff like that. But whether they had raw food back then or not is irrelevant, because their bodies were perfect, the soil was perfect, the air was perfect, the oxygen was perfect, the food was perfect, their digestion was perfect, everything was perfect. These days, we're not perfect. We have degraded so much. So Eden is irrelevant. Now, but let's look at some of the things in Scripture that God gave the prophets and his people while they were on earth. Well, first of all, Jacob. Let's have a look at Jacob. Remember, Jacob was cooking in the kitchen, and his brother Esau came in, and he says, I'm hungry, give me something to eat. Come on, it's like very impatient. And Jacob said, look, you give me your birthright, and I'll give you a bowl of lentil stew. He was actually cooking lentil stew. Excuse me. Now, if we stop eating the lentils and the legumes and the millet and the buckwheat and all those things that need to be thoroughly cooked, we're missing out on certain nutrients which may cause mental issues. And that's what I'm finding with people who go on extreme diets. They have some mental issues. So Jacob was cooking a lentil stew, okay, and he gave it to his brother Esau. Excuse me. And then another story is in the wilderness, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt. What did God feed them? They were in the wilderness for 40 years. They had no food or anything. They just had their animals. But he didn't feed them meat, did he? He fed them manna. Now, this manna was like a little bun where they had to bake it. Why didn't God give them raw food? I mean, there's nothing wrong with raw food, but not as a whole, because it wasn't nutritious enough for their needs. He gave them angel food, the Bible said, and they had to bake this heavenly food, which was called manna. And also when we look at Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 1 is an awesome chapter for health. If anyone wants to have a look at it, read the whole chapter. Daniel rejected the king's food, well, the king's meat and rich food and wine, and he said, I want vegetables, I want pulse. Another word for the vegetables was pulse, which meant it was cooked, and water. And he said, test us for 10 days, see if we look any better or if we're sick or if we're healthier than all the other people who eat your food. And he tested it and they were 10 times better and smarter in every way. But he ate plant food, but it wasn't all raw. So we've got to be careful of extremes. Now this is to help people. This is not putting anyone down, but this is observations I've had in the clinic that these 100% raw food diets, or even 80%, can be very detrimental to people's health, and I'll explain the science of it later, or briefly anyway. And then we had Elijah. Remember Elijah? He ran away from Jezebel. He was afraid of Jezebel. God said, what are you doing here? He said, I ran away from Jezebel. She was going to kill me. So anyway, the raven brought him bread and water. So last time I heard, bread was actually cooked. So God never gave anyone raw food, from what we read here in the scripture. And then, so he gave him bread and water. And remember in the New Testament, I'm from next door to where Jesus lives, or Jesus was born, Lebanon. I'm from Lebanon, next door to Israel. And we know what the diet is over there, and it's Mediterranean, Middle Eastern diet. And the Middle Eastern diet is fairly healthy, except for the meats and the sweets they make, which are yummy, but very unhealthy. But mostly it's a healthy diet, like hummus, baba ganoush, tabbouleh, stuffed zucchinis. You know, there's all this yummy food, but it's fairly balanced because you've got a bit of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And a lot of it was cooked. Jesus did not eat 100% raw food diet. And remember, he cooked fish for his disciples. So he cooked fish. So there's 100 more examples in the Bible, but like I said, this is just a brief video, just to get my little point across so I can make people aware that this is not the best way to go. And then you got Ellen White. She's a prolific health writer from the 1800s. I believe she was divinely sent because she didn't do much schooling. She had an accident. But she wrote hundreds and hundreds of words, or thousands of words, regarding health. And many practitioners I know, and myself, have read a lot of her health books, or all her health books, and we found her to be so advanced that many doctors and practitioners are actually saying what she said now, and she wrote back in the late 1800s. So her book's very accurate, and this is what some of the things she had to say about diet. You know, you got books like Ministry of Healing, Diet, Counsels on Health, Counsels on Diet and Foods, Medical Ministry, whole lot of awesome books she wrote, and very up to date. She actually says don't go to extremes, don't be too extreme, be balanced. She says grains need to be cooked. Grains and legumes need to be cooked thoroughly. So she had them as a part of her diet. And way back in the 1800s, wheat, rye and barley were actually good food. These days, you wouldn't go near them because the gluten is a problem. It's making people sick. But you've got millet, buckwheat, lentils, beans, all sorts of legumes and grains that we can eat that have got some great benefits nutritionally. And I'm finding people who have a lot of raw food don't eat enough of beans and legumes and millet and or the fats and the proteins, or the plant fats and the plant proteins, which are very beneficial for the nervous system, because the nervous system is made up of about 90% fat. The brain cells are around 90% fat, so we need the fats and the proteins in our diet for a healthy nervous system and healthy brains. So she said cook them thoroughly, and she had a fairly balanced diet. She was a meat eater, and then when God revealed to her the dangers of meat and dairy, she went totally plant-based. And she also said liquid foods are not beneficial. Why? Because you can't chew them. So we hear these statements, and again, this is not a criticism. This is look, people mean well, and we hear the statements. Oh, you've got to have a lot of juices because they're packed full of enzymes and nutrients, and raw food is full of enzymes. Well, actually, Ellen White actually says study the human body. And when we study the human body, we realise that the actual enzymes are not in the food, but they're released as we chew, okay? As we chew our food, the enzymes are released. You've got amylase, you've got lipase, you've got bile, which emulsifies the fats. You've got all sorts of enzymes. You've got hydrochloric acid in the stomach. You've got enzymes from the bowel. So your whole digestive system is producing enzymes as you're chewing. The enzymes are not always in the food, okay? So this is physiology. Have a look at it sometime. It's easy to find out. So I would never give raw food diets to an infant or an elderly person because they just can't. You notice some elderly people actually eat baby food or mush because they can't digest the raw food, they can't chew. So it's very, I'm not saying there's raw food's bad, because like I love growing veggies and I like going out and picking a kiwi or something and crunching on it. You know, as a matter of fact, if you have a salad or two a day, that's very beneficial. But what I'm talking about is 80 to 100% raw food where you cannot digest it. And what I've noticed is people that do that and go on the juice fasts regularly, they're going too extreme and they're not eating enough plant protein and fat. Actually getting, the research is that they're getting mental issues, loss of muscle, loss of weight, loss of body mass or muscle mass, and it's really difficult for them to regain it. And I've known people for years, and even some of my practitioner friends who have told me they did that in the past and they can't put weight back, they can't put their muscle back on. So we've got to be real careful here. It's just some little tips. Try and be balanced. Fruit, vegetables, seeds, nuts, avocados, chia, legumes, and some grains, the grains that haven't got the gluten, like millet, buckwheat, quinoa, etc. Now a question would arise, why do people feel better when they get, because there's some health centres that actually do raw food diets. Why do people feel better when they go home? So, okay, when you go to a health centre and they're serving raw foods and juices, what's happening here? What's happening? You're getting off all your junk. There's no junk at the health centre. So your body's starting to respond and it's going, yeah, I've got a break from the junk. So it's not the raw food that's actually making you better. So short term, you're going to get some great benefits because you're off the junk. And then you go home and then you go, well, I can't do this. It's too hard. I mean, it is tough being on a 80 to 100% raw food diet. And you're not expected to. As a balanced diet, you want about 50%. 50% cooked, 50% raw. You can vary that a little bit. So that's why people feel better and they go, wow, well, we've overcome our headaches and whatever in 5 days of raw food diet. Well, yes, that's possible, very possible. But if you continue to do that, you're going to have some big problems, okay? Big health problems, and I've seen it over and over and over again. And they're going around and around in circles trying to find the answer, and the answer's right in their diet. It's not balanced. Okay? So I just thought I'd give you a little heads up about that a diet, whether it's vegetarian, vegan, whatever, it needs to be balanced. You need to have the fats, the complex carbohydrates, not the simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates and proteins, plant proteins preferably. Okay, so if you've got any questions, drop me a line. If you want to get those genuine oils, drop me a line and give me some feedback. Thank you for listening. God bless you.